Welcome everybody to the Davis Climate Action and Adaptation Plan Public Workshop number 4. We're glad that you're able to join us this evening. My name is Diana Jensen. I'm the city engineer and also the CAP project director. We also have with us Carrie Lux, who's the project manager for the CAP. And then Joshua Lathan is from AECOM. And he'll be helping us with the presentation tonight. And then we have staff member Jennifer D'Onofrio, who's going to moderate the meeting for us. So welcome, everybody. Go ahead and go to the next slide.
So this is Carrie, as Diana mentioned, and we wanted to acknowledge our partnership and support of our Native and Indigenous people in Davis and start our meeting with the Native Land Acknowledgement. This information was developed by University of California at Davis in collaboration with the Wintun Nation and Yolo County and Davis Joint Unified School District. Yeah. So typically, various people may read this or do it as a group exercise, but often the organizer or leader of a meeting will do that work and acknowledge the restoration piece of connecting with Indigenous communities. So in that light, I'm going to read this. As we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: the Kachildihi Band of Wintun Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, the Quetzaldihi Wintun Nation, and Yochadihi Wintun Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed their young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. So thank you for that. And we're going to move to our Davis Poet Laureate, Julia B. Levine, who is going to read a selection for us of she's going to read a poem that she wrote. So Julia, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And this poem is called Cape Canyon Ranch. At the end of summer, an orchard and its drought-sharpened leaves, its dark pockets of cool. Inside one, blue flash of a jay. In another, bird song of a white-crowned sparrow. At the end of the orchard, a valley rimmed in foothills, and a river of wind carrying the dark skull of crows out of blistered scrub oak, the scorched canyons. We sit on the stone-hard dirt, our hair flying. You reach for my hand, and we stay like that, silent a long time, the hot wind pouring over. At the end of wind, this world. What is left to say except hurry, save it? Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Appreciate that. So our meeting agenda tonight, we have a few slides, brief introduction, and then we'll also do a very brief reminder of what our action development and prioritization process has been to this point. And then we'll get into the meat of this meeting, which is our group discussion, the actions, and go over input and get some dialogue going. And then we'll briefly go over the next steps in our CAP process. Next slide. So I'd like to turn it over to Carrie now for the next few introductory slides.
So the objectives of this meeting are to review the actions that we have developed over the recent months since we started this project. And we have gotten a lot of community input on what actions the community would like to see. And we've done a lot of expert analysis of that and have provided to you some draft actions that we would like to talk about. We also have a community forum where people can put comments in about the actions and read what others have said about the actions, and we'll provide that link later. It's on the website. We've used that forum as some of the information for us to put together this workshop tonight. And we'll be conducting the entire workshop with everyone in the room rather than breakouts so that everyone can participate fully. That will mean that we have to have people using the chat to make comments, raise their hand when they have something to say, and allow everyone to have the chance to speak. So we hope that people will be concise but not afraid to speak up, because this meeting will be the most interesting with getting a lot of input from as many different people as we can. That community forum that I mentioned is going to be available for close to another month. So you will be able to go in there and see some of the comments and perhaps enter some ideas that you've learned from this workshop. And again, the note mentioning the chat. So that is something that we are hoping to have be an active forum. You're welcome to introduce yourselves on the chat, who you are and what your interest is, and also to make comments. The overall project goals have been to support City Council actions to establish the climate action and carbon reduction policies. Mostly, we accelerated our carbon neutrality target to 2040, which is an aggressive goal, and that's what this CAP is meant to do. We are incorporating and prioritizing equity and inclusion in our process. We have established that target that I mentioned of 2040 with an interim target of 2030. And this will help support streamlining of environmental review for any projects that come forward, and also align with state goals and targets. In addition to greenhouse gas reduction, some of the actions that we will be talking about are identifying strategies to reduce climate risk or providing adaptation measures. So there's a combination of both mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation in the actions that we have identified. And finally, the City of Davis is going to be brought up to standards to comply with current state legislation and prepare us for an upcoming general plan update. And on the timeline, you can see that we've started the project well before the end of 2020, but actually got the contract going in December of 2020. Since that time, we've been doing a lot of community workshops and other outreach and engagement. And we anticipate following this meeting that we will have some other public meetings, including a city council meeting, and we'll be working on writing the plan, doing further analysis on each of the actions, and creating implementation roadmaps with more detailed information about how we will be doing these actions. Once we have completed the document, we will be doing the environmental review, and that's all shown on this timeline. So this slide gives you sort of a sense of the dates of the different meetings that we've had. Those are all public community forum workshops, but we've also done 2 online surveys. We've done farmers market meetings, small group meetings with focus groups and vulnerable populations. So we've taken our time to really talk with the community in various ways. So next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Josh Layson with our consultant AECOM to give a brief overview of how we got to these 29 prioritized actions and the additional actions that will be included in the plan but are not prioritized. And before you start, Josh, I'd like to again encourage everyone to put their name and some information about themselves in the chat while you're listening to Josh tell us about these actions. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Carrie. So I'm going to briefly talk about the action development and prioritization process to show how we got to where we are today. And this slide illustrates in pretty simple terms the CAP action development process. So within step one, hopefully many of you participated in those prior engagement activities that Carrie mentioned, where we've been asking for input on the types of actions you think Davis should include within its CAP. We received really great feedback and suggestions for almost 1,000 actions, and that input came from those 6 community workshops that we've held, 2 online surveys, and other outreach, and then from the city's internal team, from the technical advisory committee, and from city commissions. And from that list of 1,000 or so actions, we combined the ones that were duplicative or had similar themes and narrowed the set down to about 100 actions. Then in step 2, we used a tool called ASAP, the Action Selection and Prioritization tool, to evaluate those 100 actions to understand their greenhouse gas reduction potential, their climate risk reduction potential, their contributions to important community co-benefits, and high-level implementation feasibility. And this approach allowed us to consider the relative values for those differing types of measures using a systematic, consistent approach. The city team and our team at AECOM had several meetings to rate each of those 100 actions for their co-benefits and feasibility. And I'll quickly show a few slides next to give some further information on what co-benefits we considered and the feasibility parameters. Step 3 now has been a bit iterative, and it's where we are in the process today. So after evaluating actions in the ASAP tool, the core CAP team then met to look at the results and select the draft priority actions based on what the results of the analysis were showing. So we looked at the actions that rated highest in a number of different categories and came up with an initial draft list of prioritized actions that included 25 actions. So with that list of those 25 draft priorities, we then went back to the internal city team and to the technical advisory committee and collected their input on things like suggested language changes or recommendations for further combining actions. The city has also shared that draft list with the city attorney, who's still looking at them, but flagged at least one that was probably not legally viable. We then presented the actions to the Natural Resources Committee at a special meeting on October 18th. And in the staff report that the city team prepared, we kept the original action language, but included bullets under each of the actions to show the NRC members what we had heard so far from these different groups. So those suggestions for wording changes, combining actions, etc. We then had a good discussion with those NRC members who added even more comments to what we'd already heard. And we then asked them to also comment on the actions within that remaining actions list. So the remaining 75 actions or so that were not initially prioritized, to see if they thought any of those should be elevated to the priority list. Based on the NRC comments that we received at that meeting, we further incorporated that information into the revised set of draft actions, which, as Carrie mentioned, has since been shared on the special CAP action website, which went live about 2 weeks ago. So on that site, we present the draft 29 prioritized actions and invite residents to share their comments on those actions. And we also list the remaining non-prioritized actions, and they're organized into sectors and goals, and let residents pick up to 5 that they think should be included within the priorities list. That website is going to remain open through the City Council meeting on December 8th, so you can all review those actions further and provide additional input if you would like. Step 4 then happens after the City Council meeting, where any final changes will be made to the prioritized actions list before we develop those priorities further for presentation in the CAP. And this would include fleshing out the details of those prioritized actions and developing their corresponding implementation roadmaps and specific greenhouse gas reduction estimates. I'm going to take a few minutes now just to give a little further information on the action evaluation process. Some of you may have seen portions of this presentation in past workshops. But as I mentioned, within the ASAP tool, we evaluated the 100 draft actions looking at 3 different outcomes. Those are shown in the table at the bottom of this slide. And because this is a climate action and adaptation plan. The first outcome that we evaluated was the action's primary benefits. So that is their ability to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and or reduce climate risks. We also evaluated all three actions against, we evaluated all of the actions against three co-benefits that were selected based on community feedback from the first workshop and the first survey. The co-benefits represent additional benefits that an action provides in addition to greenhouse gas and climate risk reductions. And then we evaluated the actions against three feasibility aspects to help us think about how easy or hard the actions might be to implement. I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but I just want to touch on the items in the middle column, which shows the co-benefit and feasibility criteria that we considered in the ASAP tool evaluation. So the co-benefits selected were air quality and public health, environmental stewardship, and racial equity and social justice. The feasibility criteria were city authority, additional capital required to implement, and public support. So each action was rated in the ASAP tool on each of these criteria, and that rating was qualitative. So we were just trying to understand how positive or negative an impact each action would have within these areas. So for the co-benefits, we wanted to know, is it a really positive outcome? Is it a really negative outcome? Or is it somewhere in between? And for the feasibility criteria, similarly, we wanted to know if these things would make the action easier to implement, harder to implement, or is it somewhere in between? In terms of the organizational structure for the actions, we have been using 4 sectors or categories in which to align the draft actions. So the sectors are shown here in blue with a little context about their relationship to the city's overarching goal to reduce emissions and climate risk. The building energy and design actions are related to almost 20% of the city's greenhouse gas emissions from electricity and natural gas use in our homes and apartments, businesses, city offices, etc. And we made sure to include draft actions that speak to a range of building types to try and influence all aspects of this emission sector, including single-family homes, apartments, businesses, and city operations. Transportation and land use actions are related to nearly 75% of the city's emissions. And that's why the sector has greater representation within the draft priority actions list. 70% of total community emissions are coming from on-road transportation, so our cars and trucks when we drive from home to work or school and shopping. The majority of those emissions are from trips that are coming into or going out of Davis, with a much smaller share that's related to people moving around within Davis. So for this reason, we wanted to include draft actions that help people get into Davis with low or zero carbon options preferably, and then included draft actions to make sure that people can move around within the city in low and zero carbon ways too, and hopefully leave their cars at home. The other 5% of emissions associated with this sector are from off-road vehicles and equipment, things like construction and gardening equipment. The water and solid waste actions speak to about 7% of the citywide emissions. And even though this sector has a relatively small contribution to total emissions, these actions are important when your goal is to achieve zero emissions. And because these actions speak to broader sustainability issues like water conservation or waste reduction. And those are things that are not perfectly captured within the city's greenhouse gas inventory. Finally, the climate risk and carbon removal actions primarily address the community's vulnerabilities to climate hazards that were identified in the vulnerability assessment. That includes things like extreme heat, wildfire and air quality, flooding, and drought. So we included at least one action from each hazard area within the draft priorities list. This sector also includes long-term actions for the city related to carbon removal from the atmosphere. This is my final slide before we move into the large group discussion, but I did want to recognize that among the 1,000 or so draft action ideas that we received initially, there were some that were not advanced within the draft list for various reasons. There were really good ideas related to behavioral change and the simple steps we can all start to take, like air drying clothes, opening windows for cooling and ventilation, wearing layers inside to stay warm before turning on the heat. And those are great ideas, and they are spot on for the things that we can do individually. They were not moved forward as specific CAP actions because we were trying to identify the biggest opportunities or the hardest challenges that really require city intervention to implement. Another comment type was to upgrade the electric grid, which is a great idea to make sure we can transition to the clean electric future for our buildings and vehicles that we've been talking about. This one was left out because that responsibility is pretty far outside the city's control. It's not something the city can implement or directly facilitate, really. Another idea category is for educational campaigns, like providing biking classes and education for adults. In general, education actions on their own are not significant enough to achieve the city's greenhouse gas and risk reduction goals. But all actions could potentially benefit from some education-focused implementation strategy. And finally, there were some specific ideas for things the city's already doing, like using text alerts to notify residents of different hazards. For the most part, we tried to keep the draft action list to new ideas or those that could be expanded significantly to amplify their impact. I will stop there and turn it back over to Diana now to set up the group discussions for tonight.
Great, thank you, Josh. So for our group discussions, we have these 4 categories. We do have some time associated to each one, so we're going to try to keep on track. So for the first one, the building energy and design actions, we found by looking at our website where the actions have been listed that we've definitely had 2 of these that raised some questions. So for the building energy and design, there's 2 actions that we are going to discuss and ask for some input. For the other ones, it was a little more unclear as to which ones might be beneficial to talk about. So we're actually going to be doing some polling during the meeting to see which one of these, which one of the actions in these categories are either confusing or that you just want more information about and you want the ability to discuss. So I just want to point out, we are not going to be able to discuss every single action. We just don't have time to go over all 29. We are going to spend a little bit of time at the end to look at the other actions. Part of the website, if you go to the non-prioritized actions, we've asked you to select maybe up to five actions that you would like to see prioritized. So we are going to spend a little bit of time on some of those that had multiple people saying that they wanted them prioritized. So we will spend some time on that. But just want to reiterate that the website will be open for at least till the end of November. So if there's something that you really, wanted to be able to share information about or ask questions on, you're welcome to put comments in at the website. You're also welcome to email us. The CAP email is on the website. We can put that in the chat before the end of this meeting. You're welcome to email us and we'll try to get back to you as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and start the discussion on building energy and design. So the first one that popped out that we want to discuss today is A2. And before I read that, I'll just say that, there's a lot of words on this page. These actions do have a lot of description. So, as we are talking about these, we will leave this slide up so that you can read through them if you haven't had time to read through the actions yet. But A2 is research and develop an ordinance requiring building energy efficiency upgrades and electric or other non-fossil fuel equipment replacement at time of sale for residential and commercial properties with a defined implementation schedule for ordinance requirements and includes specific provisions for low-income and vulnerable populations. So with that, kind of our process here is if you have a question or a comment on this action, please use the raise hand function on Zoom, and Jennifer will be calling on people as the hands appear. And if you're struggling with getting that to work for you, please turn on your camera and physically raise your hand, and Jennifer will keep an eye out. And we'll try to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak to this. So, Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diana. All right, Corey, Go for it.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Corey Kaler. I'm with the Chamber of Commerce. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I've been on Zooms all day and nobody had a problem, so hopefully
You're good.
the Chamber represents a large group of businesses. We represent, developers. We represent environmental groups. The Chamber has not taken a position on any of these, but I have heard from a number of members, and it's primarily on this area regarding, the development side of it, the housing side of it. And let me give you some of the comments that I've heard and some of the things that I looked at. I come from the apartment industry world, and there's a reason why housing is expensive in California and continues to go up. There is a major problem when the Chamber did a recent survey. The vast majority of our employers, their employees do not live in Davis. They can't afford to live in Davis. In fact, the Chamber's own legal advisor could not afford to live in Davis. He lives in Woodland. I guess one of the concerns is regarding the electrification is just the upfront cost. I think we all want to do our part, but there's an enormous upfront cost to the developer, the homeowner, especially somebody selling a property that would need to convert to electrification as opposed to gas. Let me give you an example. The San Francisco Chronicle just did and I'll be brief. The San Francisco Chronicle did a story on this whole thing because the city council there is looking at some of these same items. The average cost for new housing in San Francisco, $15,000. To retrofit, $30,000. So I thought, well, that's San Francisco. So I contacted a local electrician that I know, very well respected. Roughly the same cost, about $15,000 to retrofit a 2,000 square foot home. That's expensive, and that includes all of the electrical work and all of the new appliances. So I'm not saying that the Chamber opposes what is on this page. I'm saying that I think we need to look at the cost of it. And one thing I would ask, and I don't know this, and I'll end here, I don't know the answer to this, and I'm sure somebody else has brought this up. If this is important to the city and the county and the state, is there going to be funding so that a homeowner who's selling his or her property can apply for this funding so that it doesn't hold up the sale or it doesn't hold up, an apartment for sale or whatever? I assume that there would be. If not, I would strongly encourage that we look into that so that the cost isn't really the issue.
Okay. Thank you, Corey. Thank you so much. All right, Stephen. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, I got myself unmuted.
Perfect.
Thank you for letting me talk. I'm going to make the comment that I tried to post earlier, which is that many things in this plan are great, but it is lacking in inspiration. The plan should inspire. It should have bold and meaningful actions that both get Davis to zero emissions and establish it as a global leader. And those things don't yet come across. And these building actions are, some of them, we can be way stronger. There's no reason gas should be used in any new building or retrofit. If we follow the Chamber of Commerce's line, California would have none of the environmental and not much of the social legislation that it has. I totally agree. We need to address housing affordability. And there are ways to do that. That can be a somewhat separate, although it should be linked, discussion. But fossil-free now has to come through stronger in this whole plan, both in buildings and in vehicles.
Thank you, Stephen. All right, next we have John. Go ahead, John. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. You'd think after all these months I could remember that. I'm John Johnston. I'm from the Natural Resources Commission. In reading A2, I'm looking at the time of sale and thinking that's a kind of an arbitrary but convenient time to make provisions. Why not when equipment runs out of its natural life, which is A1, it looks like. So I think it would be helpful if you guys could differentiate A1 and A2 for us a little bit so that we know exactly when it is you're proposing that people have to upgrade their equipment.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, Richard, go ahead. Richard?
Oh, oops, I'm sorry. I was looking for a different unmute button because I was working on, I just jumped over from Teams and it's in a different place.
No
Sorry.
No problem at all.
So I do want to say this is A2 in particular is the best opportunity we have to electrify buildings. And if people are opposing electrifying buildings at this point, they need to identify where else we're going to get these emission reductions. We have the constraint that we actually have to get these emission reductions. So if somebody's opposing a particular measure, they need to clearly identify what other measure they're going to propose for that. That's one thing. The second thing is that this A2 measure is actually an excellent opportunity to fund these electrification because it comes out of the sale price of the house. And right now, and for the foreseeable future, there's large excess rents that are accruing to homeowners and to other property owners for the sale of their price of their from the sale of their property. They can easily use those funds in order to finance these upgrades of the system. They just happen to make less profit than what they were making in this market. And this is going to, it's not land prices don't just go up arbitrarily. They go up relative to the economic value that is being created on that land. And so there's not a justified right to a particular return on your land investment, which is what we do when we sell a house. So I think that financing this through the sale price is the moment to do that. And it should not actually, as the market evens out, it should not have a big impact on home prices over time. Home prices will adjust.
Thank you, Richard. Good insight. All right, Roberta.
Hi, thanks. So I just wanted to agree with what Steve Wheeler said about needing to be inspirational, aiming for fossil fuel free, and being bold. And I do think that A2 is part of that being bold. And so I think it's definitely one of the major priority actions that I see if we are actually serious about not making real change, as others have said, that, actually reduces our carbon. If there's funding for helping, certain people out with this, then great, let's pursue that. But I think we have to do it. So that's all I really wanted to say.
Thanks a lot, Roberta. All right, next is Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi there. I'm Chris Granger. I'm Executive Director with Cool Davis. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on our experience in working with households already on a number of these actions. There's this interesting kind of trade-off between the questions around trying to change out systems at the time of sale versus changing out systems when they reach their end of life. At end of life, you often have people in emergency mode. So we've been developing a program to educate households ahead of time and get them thinking and making plans for retrofit ahead of that decision. So at the same time, in the middle of a sale, we would probably need to have some serious education and agreement and engagement of our real estate community on getting people ready for that kind of decision making in that kind of sale environment. And so there's a lot of work to do around getting our community on board I love what Stephen was saying about that idea of really engaging and inspiring people, because if they're inspired and motivated, then maybe they'll work through the problems of either of these kinds of difficult decisions in the middle of a failed air conditioning before in the middle of a heat wave, or trying to sell a home or purchase a home. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to jump in here. I don't see any other raised hands. I did want to let you know that the whole purpose of this meeting is for people to voice their opinions, their concerns, and we are going to be using this. We're not necessarily answering all of the questions right now. We will try to answer questions. I know Diana and I are going to put some stuff in the chat, but the main thing is we know there's a wide variety of community opinions on these actions, and we so appreciate everyone's input on this. As I said before, we are going to be developing implementation roadmaps for each action, and some of these considerations will be in there. I do think that many people have had their chat resolved. So if there are chat comments that seem to be coming that are not going to everyone, we will try to forward those along. During our section talking about building energy and design, we also wanted to allow some time for people to talk about A6, establishing a carbon mitigation fund, which helps to go toward implementation of A2 and other climate action plan measures. And so this fund would be either voluntary and or mandatory payments to mitigate local emissions activities with collected funds used to support a range of local climate change related projects. So we've just allotted a few minutes to talk about this because we spent a little bit more time on A3. And at the end of this discussion, we're going to move on to transportation components. So the other actions under A, we'll have an opportunity to talk about in other forums, such as the community forum. So comments, raise your hand if you have comments about the carbon mitigation fund.
Okay, Roberta, go for it.
Thanks. Yeah, I raised some concerns about this on the website. I think that, these carbon mitigation funds, they're not reduction, right? Reduction needs to be our top goal. And what they do is they permit people to continue to burn carbon, particularly wealthier organizations and individuals can continue to burn carbon. And it's really difficult to establish the cost of that. To accurately establish a cost that will, do what we want it to do, and to really figure out if, the carbon is actually being mitigated, right? Is it being mitigated in a way that wouldn't have happened already? Is it actually happening? So there's just, there's a bunch of known problems with this approach. And I think we need to focus our efforts on actually reducing the amount of carbon we produce and sequestering, the carbon that we can't reduce. And I think this is a bad idea. I think it just allows people to keep polluting.
Got it. Thanks.
Thanks, Roberta. Jennifer, I'll mention it looks like we have 5 hands raised, mostly people that have already commented. So if you can keep your comments brief, please, so that we can move on to talking about transportation.
Okay. All right, Stephen.
I'll second what Roberta said and also add that I'd like both to see the language simple and clear on these actions. Electrify all building systems rather than adopt requirements for electrification, etc. And these actions should be hopefully simple, that can be implemented through simple council action rather than requiring staff to set up new programs, new funds, look for grants, etc. We have very limited staff capacity like most other cities in California. And developing whole new programs is going to suck up most of their time. And so we need to really prioritize simple regulatory changes that can get us to fossil free.
Great. Thanks for that. Chris, go ahead.
So I'm speaking as a local resident rather than in my Cool Davis hat right now. I think in regards to a mitigation fund, I think we need to think more creatively about what we're really talking about for our community. We have mitigation funds that we use very well here. We tax ourselves for our schools. We tax ourselves for our for our parks and green belts, which is already some probably could be chalking up some carbon mitigation reality there. And we have a great open space fund. So I think we need to, that this opens the door for us to create a fund that's directly related to carbon solutions in our community. And it's less about the mitigation of, well, some of our air travel, possibly, or development, and more about creating a structure for us to do investment in the things we need to invest in as a community.
Great, thanks. Richard.
Now that I've found the button. So there's actually more specificity behind this proposal in A6 than what is said here. And there's been a fair amount of thought put into this. It's really about, there are certain developments, particularly commercial developments, that cannot go to zero carbon on site. It's just not possible. And they need to have some other way of being able to fund emission reductions somewhere else. And the proposal is to have those funds spent within the community, and they could be spent on A1 and A2, basically. That would be to mitigate the expenses to, especially to lower income households. So there's really a direct tie between A6 and the other activities that are on this list for funding. It's not out buying jet travel mitigation or forestry mitigation funds, which are sometimes questionable. This really has a direct tie. And I think that this is one of the most promising efforts to actually go after existing emission sources.
Great, thanks. John.
I'm going to take my hand down.
Okay. All right, Greg.
Well, I both agree with both Roberta and Richard. I think Roberta raised some good points, but so did Richard. I think my bigger concerns are what would be taxed? Where would this money come from? That's very ill defined. We want to be careful that we don't create disincentives for businesses, for instance, to be in Davis. There's already a lot of disincentives for businesses to be in Davis. I mean, you know, why would you open a business in Davis if there are a lot of regulatory requirements when you could perhaps capture some of the same clientele by opening your business in nearby Dixon or Woodland? So I think we need to be very careful about how we structure those kind of taxes. And that's one of the things that concerns me about A6 is that it doesn't say where the mandatory payments would come from. Would it be like a real estate transfer tax? Would it be a tax on vehicle sales if you went to one of the Davis automobile dealers? That's not really very well defined. So I would want to see a lot more detail on this before I think it could be supported by a large number of people. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And Scott.
Yeah, just real quick. I just don't want to see Davis caught in a this costs too much and you can't tax conundrum. It's going to be one or the other, and I think that those that can pay will, and I just want to let's not get caught up. We have to get it done. Thanks.
Thanks. All right. Back to you, Carrie. Oh, we have one more. Tom. Sorry. Go, Tom.
I'm not sure what happened to Tom.
That's
Sounds on mute. Hi.
hi.
Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend earlier meetings. I was out of town, but I just wanted to put on the table some things that should be addressed in terms of co-benefits and are usually not addressed in the U.S. anyway. And that is the indoor heat exposures and thermal health and thermal comfort impacts on the short term, where there's power outages and severe health hazards, especially for vulnerable populations. And we have a fair amount of those in Davis. And then long term, because our buildings are designed for kind of a half heating, half cooling energy efficiency, but within the next few decades, we'll be 80 or 90% cooling. And so there's a big need to really beef up passive cooling and not just rely on more air conditioning. And so there's so just getting more energy efficiency won't necessarily get you all the co-benefits in terms of health and grid reliability. And so there's a lot of examples out there and policy work by Rocky Mountain Institute and other people to demonstrate that. And I'm not sure Davis is building on that. So I would just throw that out there. And there's other examples where Portland, for example, has disclosure for energy bills on resale. And it's helped really beef up weatherization and improvements of buildings at the resale point. And then, of course, low-income weatherization itself, which the state and feds fund, is a great thing to beef up and piggyback because there's a lot of health and safety benefits there in terms of energy equity, as well as some other health benefits for asthma and other things. So I just want to throw that out there, and I can discuss it more offline, but those are major health benefits that sometimes outweigh the actual energy savings. So we may be missing some big ticket items there. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
Okay, so thank you for all that great discussion. We appreciate it. We're going to move on to transportation and land use. So this next slide. So we'll leave this up for everybody to glance at the different actions. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a poll come up where everybody can select one of these actions that you feel like we should be discussing here at this meeting. And the actions will, there we go. So they're shortened and they're not quite as verbose as the full action. So please take a minute and pick which action that you feel you would like to discuss, and whichever action ends up with the most, we'll be discussing.
What if we want none of these?
Yeah.
You can just ignore it. The poll will close.
This is not to support the action. This is to acknowledge that there needs to be more discussion of the action. So if you're ambivalent about all 6 of these, then don't vote. If there's one you hate or love or feel you need more information on, you can vote for it. That's the purpose of this. The community forum website is a great place to put in specific information about these actions, but right now we're just having a poll about what do we want to talk about right now.
I think we need a much stronger action. No use of fossil fuel vehicles after 2032, 10 years in the city limits.
So Jennifer, I can't remember how long we were going to leave this poll open.
I think we have a fairly compelling selection of make public transit free for all, and also increase routes and frequency of transit. That received 29%, but the others are all under 20. And Josh is going to lead the discussion on this action, as well as the second half of the transportation actions.
Sure. Jennifer, do you want to close that poll? Okay. B5 is one selected for now. Subsidize public transit so it is free for all to use, and promote expansion of public transit routes and increased operation frequency within Davis to support day-to-day travel needs. This was one of the highest liked priority actions, draft priority actions within the WICS website, and it also had a couple lengthy comments on it, mentioning the fact that the city and university have already started looking at this. So I will open it up to anybody who wants to raise their hand and make a comment on this action. Jennifer, are you calling on folks again?
Yes, I was, but I was on mute. Andrew, go ahead.
Hi. Thanks so much for taking comments on this. My name is Andy Ferrillo. I'm the vice chair of the Unitrans Advisory Committee and also a member of the Yolo County Transportation District Citizens Advisory Committee and involved with Yolo Mobility, a group of local advocates for transit and sustainable transportation. So the main point I wanted to make here is, and I, of course, am very supportive of this proposal to increase transit service to increase operation and frequency of transit service within Davis. And then I think because, Unitrans students already ride through a tuition fee rather than paying like ride-by-ride fares. I think this is the type of system where it would make a lot of sense to have fare-free service. So I'm very supportive of that as well. But I feel that for this to succeed and really get more people on transit and have the most impact on transportation greenhouse gas emissions, it really does have to also be coordinated with improvements to inner city transit. And that's something that I know, that's an item that's been considered. And I know that, it's more difficult because it requires coordination with non-Davis agencies like YCTD and Capital Corridor and even like Sacramento Regional Transit. But I still think Davis still really does have significant power here because we do have a seat on the YCTD board. That's Council Member Lucas Frericks right now, and then he also in that capacity sits on the Capital Corridor board. So it's something where really even in the near term here, there are real opportunities to have significant impacts using that influence. So we do have a seat at the table, in using that leverage to get these agencies to fulfill their missions effectively. Like, for example, YCTD, they actually do want to significantly increase service on the Route 42 that goes into Sacramento, up to Woodland, up to the airport, but they've not been able to do that. They wanted to do that a couple of months ago, but haven't been able to do it yet because they're facing a pretty severe driver shortage. So just been really facilitating getting them to pay more attention to detail. And then similarly, with Capital Corridor, where we have there's a lot of space on those trains between Davis and Sacramento, but right now those charge fares 4 times as much as the bus. So drawing attention to that too, and even addressing some of those types of issues could get more passengers on board. And then finally, again, leveraging that capacity, there are some very important projects coming up that will have a big impact on our inner city transportation. One of those is the YOLO 80 Corridor Improvements Project. It's going to put in managed lanes on I-80 that buses can use in facilitating coordination between, and that will serve like YOLO bus, the Causeway Connection bus from UC Davis to the medical center. Ensuring that project is done in a way that really ensures a coordination with Unitrans, really improving those connections between local and
Hey.
Sorry.
So, improving those connections between local and inner city, between the local and inner city buses, and really helping us get the most out of this planned investment in local transit and getting more people, and especially the non-student population on buses. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Or Andy. All right. Next is Greg.
I guess I should identify myself first. I'm the vice chair of the Planning Commission, but I'm speaking for myself. I think B5 has a lot of potential because one of the things I notice in my neighborhood, for instance, is a lot of parents driving their kids to school every day, and it's because I guess one big reason is there's no school bus system. in Davis, and I'm hoping that if number 5 could really result in more public transit, more of the children could get to school by taking the bus if they're not walking or riding a bike, rather than having their parents drive them, because I think that probably causes a lot of unnecessary greenhouse gas emissions. I think we have some real gaps in our current public transit system. I spent 13 years working at Sacramento International Airport, and I tried taking the Yola bus to and from work a few times, and I can tell you it's terribly inconvenient, doesn't work too well, and takes like double the time to get there than would be the case if I drove alone. And one of the biggest problems is when you would get to the shopping center in Woodland that was the transfer station, you sat there for 10 or 15 minutes inhaling cigarette smoke while the bus driver stood outside the bus smoking, and all the smoke came in through the open windows into the bus. So that was a real disincentive, just as it was there. It doesn't make sense to inhale cigarette smoke just to reduce your driving. So I think some basic improvements are needed in the existing Yola bus system as well. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Greg. All right, Robin. Robin?
I don't have my hand up.
Oh, sorry. I thought it was. Okay. All right.
This is Robin. I was muted.
Oh, different Robin. Go ahead, Robin.
Different Robin. Right. Confusing. I had a quick question on the public transit, the B5. Do we know whether cost is a barrier to transit riding? I mean, I can imagine it might be for Amtrak, but since our local transit options are relatively low cost, do we know whether reducing the cost on that or making them free would actually increase ridership? Is there some study that validates that? I mean, I'm all for it if it helps. I'm just wondering if there's research that would support it.
Thank you. We don't have anything specific that I have at the top of my head to speak to that, but I think we'll make note of your question and move on to the next commenter.
Got it. All right, Chris.
So having been a part of a number of transportation discussions, as has Jennifer, who is helping with the support of this project, this event tonight, there is a lot of evidence for college towns in particular for free transit being a way to expand services to the whole community. And I think what I see is the opportunity. The students tax themselves to provide free transit for themselves. And the city takes its federal transit money and gives it to Unitrans to provide us with a city system. But it's not enough. It's not exactly what we need. And so if we had what we needed, we would probably all use it better. And it might be better integrated with all the other systems we're trying to build out, with our relationships to the other transit in the region, and also with our internal microtransit goals. And so I think it's important for us to imagine the idea that we can just get on something and go to the place we need to go. That's where we want to be. That's where we want to be in the future. So how do we build that kind of system where we don't have to get in our cars and we can go to the place we need to go, and it doesn't take us forever to get there? And we actually maybe have fun or can get some work done along the way. So we have to think carefully about the kind of system we want and how we get there from where we are. And I think that this is one of the possible tools, and both city staff and university staff have been doing some thinking about this for a while, and we should do some more thinking about it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot. All right, Steve.
Just to add a little to what Andy Furlow was saying, I'm a colleague with him on the Yola County Transportation District representing the city, and also on the Planning Commission's liaison for Natural Resources Commission. Yellow Bus has been providing free rides to children and up to 18, I believe it is, for quite a period of time. So there's some data there that could be looked at. On the public transit subsidy, I know Davis Community Transit's $2.50 a ride right now, so that's a bigger thing to subsidize, and that would take some thought and how that might be accomplished. So that was just my additional comment on that B5 on the public transit subsidy.
All right, and Colin. Colin?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi. So I really appreciate the comments about improving the transportation infrastructure for public transportation. I mean, it currently is, a lot of it is designed at getting people to and from campus locally. But the thing that really stands out to me is we have this institution here in Davis, that is a world-renowned institution, one of the largest employers in the state of California, one of the largest employers in Northern California, and it has a completely lackluster plan for getting people to and from the campus from places in the region. There should be, much better transportation for the campus, connecting it to surrounding cities, so it's viable for people to take public transportation from Woodland and Dixon and Vallejo and Vacaville or Sacramento as students and as staff to the campus. I mean, where are the commuter bus services? There's not even a good shuttle from the train station to the campus. So as much as, Davis needs to fix its transportation, we're so closely linked with the university. I really see the university's lack of regional transportation options as a major problem. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, and then Stephen.
Okay, transportation is close to 60% of Davis's emissions. None of these policies, none of these actions is really going to make a dent in it. We need to do better. We really need to get rid of fossil fuel vehicles. This decade, electric vehicles are going to become cost competitive or cheaper than fossil fuel vehicles. So we've really got to move towards getting rid of them.
Cool. Thanks a lot. All right.
So I think, we better move on to the next one. Josh.
Richard, we'll get you with the next one.
Yep. So now we're going to look at the 5 actions on the screen here, B7 through B11, and I think Jennifer has another poll for us to pick which one we will dig into.
So while Jennifer is bringing that poll up, our purpose at this meeting was to pick a few key actions that people are interested in discussion and more information on. Obviously, there's a lot more to say, but we tried to pack a lot into this meeting. So this is the second half of the transportation and land use action. And then after this, we'll move on to climate risk and carbon reduction actions.
Great. I'm going to end the poll now. I think we have a clear winner. I'm going to share the poll. Should be able to see the poll now.
I didn't see the poll. Did you? I don't know. Did everyone see the poll?
Oh.
Yeah, Carrie, as host, we can't see it the same way that the non-hosts see it.
Okay.
So the breakaway winner is B11. It's the bottom of this table on the screen. Develop incentive options to increase housing construction in the city, including high-density mixed use, especially office space and food service, transit-oriented and affordable options. And this one was, I believe, the second highest liked action within the Wix website about 30 minutes before this workshop started.
And 53% of the participants in the poll selected this one. All right, I'm going to stop sharing the poll now.
Yep. Oh, perfect. So let's open this one up for conversation. Shall we, or how should we, increase housing construction within the city to densify and support greater mixed use of services, transit, and considering affordability?
Got it. All right. First is Greg. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, in addition to being the vice chair of the Planning Commission, I was the chair during the past year of the city's Housing Element Committee. And we came up with about 10 recommendations we made to include in the housing element to the city council a few months ago. And it included things like eliminating single family R1 zoning, being able to convert shopping centers so that you could have more mixed use. In other words, housing that might be above commercial and office space. And it's unfortunate to say those recommendations didn't get very far. They didn't get a lot of traction. So we seem to be having a dichotomy here. On the one hand, there seems to be a lot of interest in increased housing construction, but the ways to actually get there don't seem to be getting a lot of support. So that's going to be a conundrum going forward, just an observation. It seems like everybody wants it, but when the rubber meets the road, a lot of opportunities or options for getting there don't seem to garner a lot of support.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot. All right, next is Chris. Go ahead, Chris. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, my thing keeps popping around, so I'm chasing myself around the screen trying to unmute myself. I just wanted to share, some of our observations. This is putting my Cool Davis hat back on. Not all housing and households in Davis are super energy efficient or green households. And so I would say that this is a really great action if you don't use the word including, but you say exclusively or focus on that list, because then you get at resilience for our community, where we're reaching, we're building housing for vulnerable populations so that they get the best housing instead of the worst housing. And we're also dealing with density. And so I think it's about how this action is phrased, because generically providing generic housing is not going to solve our transportation GHG problem, for instance. Just because we build housing here doesn't mean that everybody works here. And so we've got to have some other benefits that go along with it, and think deeply about what kind of housing we're actually building. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot. All right, next is John. Go ahead, John.
Well, I'll just build on what Chris said there. She took the words out of my mouth. Just because I think if you build housing, making it high density, mixed use, et cetera, can be argued to be desirable things. But building housing doesn't mean that we aren't just setting up more spaces for people to live here and commute to the Bay Area. This is an issue that's in the DISC project. It's an issue that, I'll just leave it. In the DISC project, they have housing, and they're struggling with trying to figure out how to make sure that people who work at DISC are going to live in the housing they're going to build, as opposed to travel someplace else and increase our worst component in our GHGs.
Great. Thanks for that. All right. Next is Colin. Go ahead, Colin.
Hello. So I think Chris Granger really hit it well, that we really have to look at what type of housing is being built. And frankly, the 10 proposals that came forward from the Housing Element Committee that was, 50% developer interest people were not that. It was a deregulation of the market, which is the opposite approach of what we need to be doing. So, thank goodness those proposals haven't been picked up. We need actual, inclusive, affordable housing proposals, and the types of regulations that we're talking about in these meetings about actually putting in place, climate goals. And what was just said about the DISC project is perfectly on point. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and then next we have Richard. Go ahead, Richard.
So the point I want to make is that if we are going to accomplish any of the transit conversion to transit, getting people out of cars, we're going to have to increase the density of our community. I did some calculations, and if you look at Oakland, the density, Oakland is where transit seems to work reasonably well. The density there is about 9,000 people per square mile. If you look at San Jose, where transit doesn't work, density is about 6,000 people per square mile. Davis right now is at about 7,600 people per square mile of developed space. So we're going to have to increase our density about 20% in order to get to the level of Oakland, and Oakland is really like the minimum. We can't pursue our transit objectives without pursuing changes in land use that increase density and mobility, local mobility. The two have to go hand in hand.
Thank you for that. All right.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. And then let's move on to the next slide, which is discussing the climate risk and carbon removal. So, Josh, can you forward? There we go. And Carrie, did you want to lead this one?
Yes. So we have combined the C1 actions, which is waste and water, with climate risk and carbon removal, and there are two. Jennifer, have you put up the poll for which one we would want to talk about?
I have, yes.
Okay.
It is up.
So thank you. For some reason, I saw the polls previously, but I'm not seeing them now. So,
Carrie, D2 is the current front runner. Just so you know, that's expanding the urban forest with climate-ready trees.
Okay. Well, Jennifer or Josh, maybe you can give us a percentage on who wanted to talk about that, and we can just get going.
50% right now.
50. Okay.
By far the most popular.
So this one is about the urban forest, meaning specifically public trees in parks, greenbelts, and open space, with climate-ready species that provide shade, and develop a tree replacement plan for all public trees, including street trees in all neighborhoods. So this is one that would be implemented through the Parks Master Plan, but by having it as a component of the CAP, it really focuses priority on this action. So this is one of two specific actions related to trees and landscape and climate-ready elements. The other one is later on and reflects private landscapes. So I'll do your job, Jennifer, and call on Colin, and then turn it back over to you.
Sweet. Go ahead, Colin.
Hi. So I should mention that I'm the chair of the Tree Commission, but I'm speaking only for myself. So I think that this is a positive thing that the city can be doing. One way to do it would be to pick some older neighborhoods to do as demonstration projects first. It's certainly something that I've been talking about with other people. And moving to climate-ready trees in this landscape is important. Although I am much more concerned about the other item where we're talking about private landscapes, such as parking lots. But I'll leave out any comment about that now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Roberta, go for it.
Hi, thanks. So yeah, I just want to say I'm very much in favor of this action, kind of back to my earlier comment that the actions that really reduce our carbon, I think, need to be our top priorities. And this is one that can. And, people might say, oh, we're doing this already. Well, if you look at the numbers in the city, the trees that we've lost through at Sutter and at WDAAC, and the trees we've gained, we're actually not ahead. So prioritizing this action and having this be one of the ways in which we draw down our carbon usage, I think is really important.
Thank you for that. All right. Anyone else want to speak about this?
I will mention that this action is both a mitigation action, so it reduces carbon emissions, as well as an adaptation action because it sequesters carbon. Most of the D actions are at least adaptation actions. Many of them are also mitigation. So if there's nothing else on this slide that people have comments on, we can move to the next section. And that one I talked about with private landscapes was actually C1 and includes more residential and commercial landscapes, not necessarily parking lots. That's being addressed through another process, which could be in the climate action plan, but for now, those are the two that are in here. So
I'm going to go back for 1 second. Tom, did you have a question about the previous slide?
I was just talking about, I wanted to comment on urban forests.
Oh, go ahead.
And I definitely think we need to go full scale on climate ready trees and maintain and build our urban forests. But I think in terms of actual carbon reductions, it's going to take a while for those trees to sink a lot of carbon and to have a major cooling effect. I don't know how fast a lot of those trees grow, but probably on the order of 20 or 30 years. And the climate ready trees have a much smaller shade canopy from what I've seen. We've planted a few in our backyard to replace older trees, and I've seen the UCD work. So I would be cautious about overestimating those benefits in terms of carbon sinks and also in terms of cooling the neighborhoods to get the energy reductions you want from buildings, because it's very localized and it tends to be not as much as you would hope, I think. And so from at least the several modeling studies I've seen around the world, the urban forest helps, but it's not enough to really cool buildings that much. And especially in tighter urban spaces where you don't have the room to put in a lot of big trees. So
okay.
I mean, it'd be great if we could all plant vines around our house and do quick measures like that. But I think external shading is a faster, quicker way to get a lot of those benefits on buildings. And of course, cool surfaces are the other biggie. So I would just be very cautious about overestimating those effects. And there are ways to model and estimate that. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks for that. Very insightful. Chris, did you have a comment about trees?
So I think I just want to reinforce what Tom was saying about the role of trees in sort of the bigger look at our landscape, and that we have allocated a tremendous amount of our community to roads and parking lots, and all of those places are going to need some kind of cooling. And so it's not just about our personal landscapes or even our parks and greens belts, but we need to think differently about our treescapes and how trees and those, where are the right places for some kind of cool surface response versus trees, and what are the right places for trees, and how do we do our best to create the kind of spaces we want in the future where everybody is comfortable moving about. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. All right, Carrie, I have the next poll ready when you're ready.
Let's put it up, yes.
All right.
I think Diana is going to talk about the last slide that we have for actions.
Yes, so as soon as we get our poll results, we'll get started on the discussion.
And this is the last poll for the night.
And just a quick comment, the purpose of these 29 actions that have been developed are that they work they work together. They have different purposes, and we will be developing more information about each of them. But the intention was to address all of the sectors that are significant, as well as both mitigation and adaptation, and to look at our existing greenhouse gas inventory and our vulnerability assessment to make sure that we're addressing the needs that have been identified specifically for our community.
Thanks, Carrie.
It had been a tie across D6, 7, and 8, but D6 is pulling away now about 40%.
Yeah, more than
very slow horse race.
I'm going to share the results.
Thank you.
D6 is the winner at 42%.
It was very, very close.
It was. All right, so we'll go ahead and open it up for people to comment, or if there's questions.
Okay. All right, Richard, go ahead.
I must have been the only one who raised their hand.
So far.
So and this is related to actually this whole group of measures from C1 down to D9 is this particular measure includes, for example, the urban forest management, which was, I can't remember what it was, D2 perhaps. And it seems like that these measures, there are many of these measures that can be rolled into other measures as subpoints or combined together. D2, for example, was about cooling or air filtration, which is actually part of the energy efficiency that is in A1 through A4. So I think that there's some consolidation of these measures that could be put together and have subpoints in them on these various plans. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about D8 and D9 here while I have it, because I voted for those. These are basically two of the same thing, which is about carbon sequestration. But I want to point out that this really should be something that we leave to the county to do, to Yolo County, which has 100 times more agricultural acreage under its jurisdiction than we have. Carbon sequestration is an important way of capturing and reducing CO2, but it's not in our bailiwick directly to address with this. We should really leave this to the county to lead, and I think that the sustainability committee that the county has right now should be charged with looking into this and developing a county-wide plan for all of the agricultural land in the county. And we should devote our resources focusing on what we can do within this city of Davis.
Great, thanks for that. All right, Stephen, go ahead.
I'll second much of what Richard said. I think in general, throughout this plan, we can prioritize actions way better. And we've got to reduce the number of actions because staff can't do all these things. D5, is this really an issue? I mean, as far as I know, Davis doesn't have major flood risks, or else the entire town will go if Lake Berryessa, if the dam breaks up there. Let's not spend time on it. An advisory committee, okay, you could spend a lot of time setting that up and staffing it, but what's it really going to give us? Let's focus on a few key actions in this whole plan that are really going to get us to fossil-free status or really protect very vulnerable populations.
Thank you so much. All right, John, go ahead.
In the same vein that Steve just said, I want to focus on D6. I don't want D6 to become this kitchen sink in which everything that we're doing environmentally gets dumped. Some of these things are really important for climate, such as the solid waste and methane and those kinds of things. And some of these things are not. You know, infiltrating your stormwater into your front lawn is not flood control and is not a climate adaptation policy, although it's a good thing to do. So I just don't want to fill this with feel-good or greenwashing ideas. Let's focus this on things that are really going to push the CAP agenda.
Got it. Thanks. Anyone else?
Okay, well, thank you for all that input. Oh, Chris has her hand up.
Oh, Go ahead, Chris.
You're on mute.
I want to reinforce that this is a climate action and adaptation plan. And so there is very little anyplace else a focus on our public service and resources related to cooling, heat emergency, weather relief, resilience. There's a reference to microgrids and microgrid planning in the energy section. And I think that D7 might easily be combined with some of that because it's bigger. It's about the social relationships in our community, not just the kinds of systems, human systems that we need to build to care for each other in the face of some of the climate impacts that are coming at us.
Thank you. All right, and then Colin, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to echo that some of these ideas that are coming forward, that we have to think about the bigger picture and do much more. And, when we're talking about trees, like we were just a minute ago, a lot of this is already happening with trees. If that was all that came out of CAP, that would be very disappointing because when it comes to like parking lots and public and commercial spaces, one of the biggest problems is that there's no accountability and follow-up to make sure that the trees were planted stay. And there's an important part of adaptation, but it's already being worked on as we're revising the Chapter 37, the city's tree ordinance. And so, if that were all that came out of this, that would be incredibly disappointing. So I appreciated the comments focusing on other parts. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, thank you. So, Josh, I think we can move on to the next slide. So we are running out of time for what our goal was, but I do want to give an opportunity to talk about these other actions. These are actions that were not prioritized, but if you go to the website that has all of our actions on it, we did ask if there were up to 5 that people might want to see elevated to prioritized. And these 4 stood out because they had multiple selections. People chose these. So although I want to keep this part of the conversation brief, I think instead of picking any one of these, I will just open it up to see if anybody does want to comment on any of these or have questions about them. And we'll try to spend just 3 or 4 minutes on this item.
Great. All right. Greg, go ahead.
I was the chair of the Housing Element Committee, and B27 was again one of the 10 recommendations we made. And I would say that this is not one of those recommendations that could be categorized as representing interests purely of the development community, because this is not related in any way to like expanding the boundaries of Davis or annexing land to facilitate new development. I think it's really related to the fact that most of the people, if not all of the people on the Housing Element Committee, I think it might have been a unanimous vote, saw some real opportunities for using underutilized existing shopping centers as opportunities for doing mixed use development. And in some cases you could even, perhaps in addition to adding stories to the existing buildings, if they would accommodate it, get a whole lot more new energy efficient structures by demolishing what's there and building something from scratch that's highly energy efficient with solar, etc. There could be a combination of close-in housing along with close-in commercial activities. So I would hope that this recommendation that was made by the Housing Element Committee could be pursued a little further. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. All right, next is Richard. Go ahead, Richard.
So I'm going to comment on D10. It seems like D10 is already part of the urban forestry plan, which is, I can't remember what number it is, but it seems like this is repetitive and probably shouldn't be included as a separate item or easily put in as a sub-bullet for doing whatever was under the urban forestry plan.
Got it. All right. Next is Roberta. Go ahead, Roberta.
I'm going to partially agree with Richard there on D10, but I think it's a little different, but I do think it needs to be combined. So the way I read this deals with plants. The way I read the earlier one, it deals with trees. And I think what we need is a holistic item that considers both trees and plants for sequestration and other long-term climate resilience benefits, as it says. And that way we can choose in particular locations. Do we want plants here? Do we want trees here? Do we want both? It kind of depends on the site. So I think, yeah, combine that with the other item. And I do think it's an important one.
Great. Thanks for that. Anya, go ahead.
Hello. I'm sure you'll all be surprised that I'm commenting on D22. Plant-based diets and eating less meat and lower on the food chain is one of the most impactful things that people can do. And Davis is fortunate enough to have a lot of tools and systems and organizations in place to make this happen in a much bigger way. And we've really proven over the last 4 years that public events are already have the demand for about 15% of people will order a plant-based food option if they're offered it. So I think it's kind of an easy shoe-in, and it would be really great if anything that city money was going into any kind of event was only serving plant-based foods to set an example, to show how great they are, show how easy it is, and so that we're not putting city money toward something that is has such a high impact.
Great, thanks for that comment. John, go ahead.
I'll put in a vote for B12. I can imagine families trying to decide whether to have one car or two cars, are seeing that the bus might not 100% cover their second car needs, and having something like this as part of that system would be helpful. We might not have to develop it. It might be something we could contract with the private folks like the Zip car.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. All right. And then Steve.
Mute. Just a comment on B27. In larger urban areas now, some office buildings are looking at converting to housing, and that may be in the future for Davis. And also things you wouldn't think of. I know up in Chico, a former church that needed to expand became a restaurant downtown. So it wouldn't strictly be shopping centers. There would be other current land uses that could be converted to housing, for instance.
Thanks for that. All right. Chris.
So related to B27, I love B12. There's a great program in Sacramento that everybody could take a look at. I don't know if, Jennifer, you have that at your fingertips to share the link. I think B27 gets at the heart of some things that we learned in working with the form-based code for the downtown plan. And I really appreciate Greg's comments about, this kind of rethinking of our shopping centers and commercial corridors. I think this is important work that we have to do, and we should be calling this out as a primary activity in our general plan process, that we might be looking at how we think about those as neighborhood centers, as walkable, bikeable places where we do other things besides get our groceries and park our cars. And sort of re-envision those as little itty bitty city centers. So as we densify, we have great places to go that are part of, where we can shop and meet and connect with other people in our community.
Thank you. And I think I found what you're talking about. SAC to zero, right? Is that it?
I think it's Get Car.
Oh, well, there's that. But this is.
Chris, you're on mute.
Yes, the SAC to Zero program and the Sacramento gig, the actual vehicles, the gig cars.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Thank you for all those comments. So we'll go ahead and go to the next steps, Josh. So our next steps in our process are to take into consideration all the comments we've heard here today. And again, the website will be available at least till the end of the month. And we'll be looking at all of the comments. Then we will be, for the prioritized actions, we're going to be developing implementation roadmaps, including greenhouse gas reduction potential. So we will start that process after we go to the City Council at their December 7th meeting. We're going to take the prioritized actions to the council to do a check-in so that they have an opportunity to comment on them as well. And then we're going to be writing the draft CAP document, which will have those implementation roadmaps in there. The actions that are on the website now that are not prioritized will be in the document as potential actions in the future. And then we'll be continuing discussion at commission meetings in January and February as we write the document. The goal is to have the document adopted in March and begin the environmental review, and hope to finalize all that by end of June 2022. So I just wanted to thank everybody again for joining us this evening and some really great comments. That really concludes the end of our presentation, but Carrie and I, and I'm not sure if Josh can stay a little bit or not, but if there's additional comments or questions, we're happy to stay on for a while.
Johan, go ahead.
Hi, I just had a quick question. It seems to me that connecting the linkages between the vulnerability assessment, the numbers that imply the largest impact on GHGs, what the list is there, and would it help to insert those columns, 2 columns into your chart that sort of helps make the connection and provide context for the actions? Because it seems like we're voting on a lot of things, and I think that's important. Somebody's already mentioned, what are the impacts on GHGs? What does the list look like? We know that, for instance, transportation is really high. But what are the other ones? So as we begin to prioritize things, we can both see how do they stack up against the vulnerability assessment that you've conducted, and how does it link to GHG reductions? Is that possible to do that? And does that make sense?
When you said the charts, did you mean like the list of action options that we were looking at during the discussions?
Correct. And for the ones that we choose, put those 2 columns into those ones that emerge so that people have a context for what we're referring to. And because those 2 documents are really critical, I think, to the choices that we need to make, and having that data available, I think really helps inform the decisions that we need to make. It's just a suggestion, but I think they would be helpful. I don't know what other people think about that.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to clarify, Diana, are we taking comments or are we responding to them?
I will respond if we can.
Got it.
We definitely want to hear everybody's comments. I don't know that we'll have an answer right away for everybody, but we'll certainly listen and take it into consideration for future action. And yes, if people could please continue to raise your hands, and Jennifer will call on you.
Great. I'm gonna probably slaughter your name, but Aditya.
Thanks. That works. I had, I think, more a couple of overarching comments and questions. While for us we can only see the actions that you've laid out, but there is, and I don't know if there is enough data or evidence that's gone behind setting out these priorities. So at this point, it seems like there is an evidence-based decision-making gap. And there is a lot of data that's available from various different research institutions around California, the US, as well as UC Davis to actually support a lot of these action points that you're talking about, because I think that should be the basis on which a lot of these get prioritized rather than our emotions and what we feel is right. And I talk for myself as well. That's one. The second was I did, and I might be wrong, I did see somewhere a mention of the fact that there was a prior climate plan for the city that was made some years ago. Do we know what were the actions set out then, what was achieved, what was not, why that was not? I think that would help set a lot of context for some of us who are commenting as the general public. And the third point is that, I am seeing that financing is becoming a critical issue. Everybody's worried about where this money is going to come from. There are many opportunities, and if once these actions are set out, there are opportunities where, if backed by the city, it's seen as a sovereign backed project, and you can club a few of these together. And there are many financiers who are more than happy to invest in city level projects for climate related interventions. And I've had some experience in helping cities in Europe and in India do the same thing. We're happy to share those findings offline. But I think there is merit in being able to look at it from that perspective and not get constrained by the fact that everything has to be raised through taxation or city resources necessarily. And finally, from an accountability perspective, I think that would be critical. I mean, I know that these are not necessarily binding actions for the city, but at the end of the day, if we are to achieve this, I think the gap between intent and action is really driven by accountability. And I think it would be, it's hard to get to, but if there is something, if there's a sweet deal that we can crack on accountability in the city, I think that would be a fantastic example of what Davis can be for many, many other cities around the country and in other parts of the world as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. Next is Colin.
Just briefly respond to some of the thoughts that people have been making. We did address the existing climate action and adaptation plan, and that was part of the background research that was done before we started all of this. Both staff and our consultant took a look at that. Some of the comments that are being made are going to be part of the recommendations within the CAP, and it's not that we're trying to get community input, not ask the community to make decisions or choices. So we are using technical information and scientific data to back up what is reasonable for us to do within our community based on both community input about what people would like to see and expertise. And that is what we used to evaluate the actions that were presented by the community. So it may seem like there are gaps, and all of the discussion that's happened tonight is so valuable, and I know we've learned a lot, but we really did address these actions through the lens of how does it respond to our greenhouse gas inventory? What is the path that we're going to get to carbon neutrality? What's the vulnerability assessment say? And a lot of that will be written into the document, but we do want to have this recurring community input on where we are in the process before we've finished it all. So I did want to comment on that we are not ignoring the science or the technical components of this, but we are focusing a lot on community input and on equity and inclusion. So.
All right. I'm going to move on to Colin. Go ahead, Colin.
Hi. So this is kind of a general comment, and forgive me if this is a little rogue. It goes to the reducing car use. And one thing that strikes me is the city really needs to address the parking requirements to move away from parking minimums. There's a lot of angst that comes around removing the parking minimums. And so the city would be well served to have an ordinance in place that defines when you can move away from the parking minimums and how to put in place things like zip cars, delivery zones, guest parking requirements, increased biking parking requirements, So, the city's code could be much more forward thinking so that it's not just, oh, there's no parking requirements now. It's how do we put zoning requirements in place that make no parking work so that the community is ready to accept it. So my apologies if that's a little rogue. It's something that doesn't seem to be addressed anywhere. But moving away from parking minimums would be a real positive move for the city. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right, next is Greg. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, the first thing I want to say is I really appreciate the community forum website that the staff set up for this process. It is really easy to use. It's a good format. I'm just disappointed that more people haven't utilized it, but to Carrie and Diane and the consultants, I found it very easy to use. I have a comment about number B9, this idea that transportation demand management programs would be set up. Essentially, this is a program that would attempt to force employers to provide transportation to and from work for their employees. And it's a favorite strategy of consultants and academics. I'm probably one of the few people in Davis who's ever had the responsibility of trying to make one work. And the bottom line is they don't work because of the onerous requirements of places upon an employer to coordinate it. I recall a conversation I had with Becky Hibbert during the downtown plan when she said, I'm sure glad the city wasn't considering something like this when my business is operating. And the point she made is she had employees that came to work at Hibbert's from a wide geographic area and worked different shifts. And she said there was absolutely no way as a small business owner she could have ever figured out how to develop a transportation demand management program to essentially figure out how to force their employees out of their cars and into mass transit or to carpools and that type of thing. I was charged with trying to make it work at Mather Airport for all of the tenants at that airport, which ranged from UPS, DHL, aircraft servicing companies, you name it. And when we told them, well, the California Air Resources Board is telling us we have to make you do this, they had the same reaction. Out at Mather Airport, they had employees that came from all over, El Dorado County, Sacramento County, Yolo County, Solano County, and for those employers to figure out how do you get all those people into carpools, it's just totally infeasible. I think this idea that you can force people out of their cars and into carpools and whatnot, I think if this is going to go further, the city needs to do it first. I apologize, Carrie and Diana, but the city should force you guys to carpool and vanpool to work. Try it for a year, document it, see how well it works before you try to force it on local businesses. Thanks.
Actually, I think Carrie and Diana actually ride their bikes to work some days. So.
Well, that's good. But in that case, everybody from Mike Webb to Ash to everybody else, should be forced to try to do it too. See how it works for a year. Take every employee from the city manager on down to the lowest level entry employee and tell them can't drive to work alone anymore. See how it works. You'll find it doesn't.
Oh, thank
Greg,
you.
I read your comment on the Wix website, and I really appreciate how thoughtful you were in each section that you provided, and the fact that you have real world experience attempting to implement a TDM program. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on what possible solutions might be. Do you think there are ways that you could implement a TDM program that would be successful? Are there ways to work around the edges to make parts of them function better? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. You can follow up with the CAP email address too if you have some ideas. But
I think if you were talking about a big employment center, like some of the places I've worked at in the past, like downtown Oakland, downtown Cincinnati, for example, where you've got really large employers in big 20, 30, 40-story buildings, it might be pretty easy to make it work. I mean, I know, for instance, in San Francisco, they've got buses that some of the large high-tech companies use, and they transport their employees to and from work that way. But I think for a small town like Davis, comprised primarily of small businesses, but people who commute from a wide geographic area, it's pretty difficult to make that kind of work. And I think it doesn't recognize too that people can't always live near where they work. I had a job one time in downtown Sacramento where one of my coworkers lived in Fairfield. And I said, well, why do you live in Fairfield if you work in downtown Sacramento? And he said, well, it's because my wife works in downtown San Francisco. So Fairfield is in between. She drives to a BART station in Concord, catches BART into the city, and I drive from Fairfield to downtown Sacramento. And that I think that's a dynamic that's increasingly, common these days. So I think it's a real conundrum. I don't know if there's any great solutions in a small college town like Davis. I think it could work perhaps in large urban centers, but I don't know if it's going to work here.
Sure. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot. I appreciate you going through the thought exercise.
All right, Chris, go ahead.
Well, I have a completely different view than Greg, and partially because I think we do have that big employer, and it's called UCD, and they have a transportation demand management program. And if we just piggybacked their program and their plans, and every small business in our community could just participate in their program, it would be an amazing thing. And I say that because transportation demand management is all kinds of tools. It's carpooling. It's other kinds of incentives. It's Google-style buses, which UC Davis is working on doing. It's shuttles. It's last mile programs, and creating internal incentives for employees to be able to purchase cars in a discount way, like electric vehicles, if they must drive a single occupancy vehicle. There are all kinds of things that are built into transportation demand management programs that are effective. And I think, again, and I'll go, Stephen has left the room, but the emphasis that he brought tonight on the, what we have to do. We have an imperative, an urgency, and our biggest problem is transportation. And so we've got to try everything. I appreciate a past federal administration's perspective on energy of all of the above until we can get to exactly what we can do for the future. And I think that we have to think deeply about trying things, even if they make us a little bit uncomfortable, and get our minds together to solve that problem, Greg, that you were talking about for the small business. We don't want to put the burden on the small business. We want them to be able to offer their employees a great program that gives them different options for the future.
Great, thank you. All right, second. Richard.
I'm going to agree with both Greg and Chris and come out with a different perspective at the end. I absolutely agree with Greg that we don't have the employment base to do TDM in the traditional way. But Chris raises a possibility to made me think about a different possibility, which is it's not that we need a TDM, or at least not one in the traditional way. What we need instead is a community managed transportation system. And I don't know that using the TDM acronym is the appropriate metric or use for this, because it does carry with it the belief that it's going to be imposed on employers. So reaching out with and cooperating with UC Davis and creating like we did with Unitrans, but basically expanding it greatly is probably the better approach to get to this level. But again, a lot of this is going to depend on if we're going to get more people into transit and out of cars, it's going to require changing the land use in our community, as I said before. So otherwise, we're wasting our time. So,
thank you. Johan.
This is a question sort of at the end of the session. I don't know if other people have comments about this specifically, but I had a question about one of the next steps. And is this a good time to talk about that, or should we wait on that?
You can talk about whatever you want right now.
Okay. So one of the things I've been reading, and I'm sure you have too, is that what makes this all work after we have the plan is a really good detailed implementation plan that engages the community and brings in all the resources of the community, whether it's the religious organizations, the nonprofits, whatever. So my question is, what kind of input will the community have to the implementation plan itself? Because it sounds like it's going to go to council as a draft implementation, the implementation roadmap. Are we going to see any of that? And will we have any input as a community on that? I just have to say, I think it's really important because I hope that part of that, every climate report says, we know the science. What we have is a failure for collaboration. And I'm hoping that the detailed implementation plan has a tremendous amount of collaboration internally in the city as well as externally with its partners. And that's clearly delineated so that there's no confusion about accountability and there's no confusion about who is responsible for doing what kinds of things, particularly in the staff in the city, because otherwise I could see this unraveling and we'd have a great plan, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to implement it. And that really deeply concerns me. So I'll stop. Is that possible to answer that today?
I can provide some information, and I'm sure Diana has some information as well. The implementation roadmaps are intended to identify who is responsible, what the funding will be, the approach that we are going to take, including the metrics for how to measure success, etc. Those roadmaps which will be developed by our internal staff team, our consultant, and other stakeholders will be included in the CAP document. They may not be completely finalized by the time we go to City Council for another chance at community input in December, but some of those will have been started to be developed. And that will inform our completion of writing the document. Once the document is complete, there will be a public review period on the administrative draft document. So people will have a chance to respond. There will also be an environmental review process through CEQA requirements, whether it's an EIR or some other type of document, like a mitigated negative declaration, that will also have community input. So that's why the timeline shows that this will be completely finalized by mid-year next year, because there is a lot of touch points for community input throughout the process.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. That covers what I would have, how I would have responded to. There will be other opportunities.
I don't see anyone with another question.
I guess I'd like to add one thing to what we were just saying. There are a number of different reasons for the actions that go into the CAP. There are the ones that we can start on right away. There are the ones that are a more long-term look at what we can do, and we want to include both. We'll have to identify the first top priorities within those top 29 or whatever the number ends up being, as well as some that might take longer. Also, putting all of the actions that were identified beyond the 29 into the CAP document allows us to be ready if funding or partnerships or other collaborations come up. Those actions are in our document and we're poised and ready to implement them. So some things that we may not know where the funding may come from right away, we can be searching for funding on. So one of the things that the CAP will do is establish our prioritized actions and how we intend to implement them. But the real test will be as we do greenhouse gas inventories every 2 years, as we are committed to doing, and go back. It's an iterative process. So it will be a living document that we can go back and check and see, Are the actions we've identified as the top priorities working? Are they not working? How do they need to be adjusted or addressed? So we're seeing this as really a framework for implementation, and that's the way we're looking at it, that it's not just let's finish it and then it's done and there's nothing more to be said about it.
Thanks, Carrie. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate it. We have been recording it, so we will be posting it on our website for others to review if they were unable to join. And as I've said before, we are going to keep that CAP website where you can go in and comment on each action. We're going to leave that open for at least till the end of the month. And then I encourage all of you to join in our December 7th City Council meeting where they will be discussing this as well. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.